Welcome to the Power Hour, Optometry's largest and longest running show. I'm your host, Eugene Shatsman, and I have some incredible guests for you today. I'm interviewing Dr. Tyler Mills and Dr. Brian Samartino, and their story is nothing short of remarkable. After optometry school, these guys started a small part-time practice, cold, while both working part-time elsewhere, and they turned it into a pretty impressive location. And recently, they've hit a stride to where they doubled the practice, then they doubled it again, and they're on track to do it a third time. And what is the secret to their success, you ask? Well, you'll hear them talk about it, but you'll also hear them talk about a whole bunch of pieces to the puzzle. Office culture, scaling up mindset, the success of dry eye in their practice, for example, the ability to acquire and immediately add value to new offices in their area, and really just being able to scale an unmatched patient experience, which is actually really hard to do. So they don't just talk about their successes in this episode. You'll also learn about some of their challenges along the way, whether it's working together as business partners or dealing with difficult staff or difficult decisions. Again, this episode takes two guys who started their business part-time just 10 years ago and chronicles a bunch of learnings to help them get to a level that some people only dream about. So I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you do too. I do want to remind you to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And two more things related. During the episode, Tyler mentioned an HR screening tool called Wonderlic. And I may have misspoken during the show and said that the Power Practice can help you out with it, even if you're not a Power Practice member. So then I called after the show, and they're actually going to honor my flub. So if you reach out to the Power Practice after the show, we'll get you some access to Wonderlic. The second thing, as I always say, I am truly grateful to be a resource for so many people in the industry. I do appreciate your feedback, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me on the Power Practice website or on eugeneshatsman.com. Love your feedback. So thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's show. All right, Dr. Tyler Mills and Dr. Brian Samartino, welcome to the Power Hour. Excited to have you guys both on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so I think it is probably worth going into introductions later in the show. I think people will get to know you throughout the conversation organically. I think I think there's lots of remarkable things about the business that you run and the practices that you run. I think the most remarkable thing for me, and full disclosure for the audience, you guys are both clients of the Power Practice. You guys are also both clients of National Strategic. So I happen to know this, is that over the course of the last 5 years, your practice has grown 562%. Now, depending on which industry average you look at, you're killing it. You're killing it, guys. And so the question I think the audience would probably benefit from the most is, what are you doing? What are you doing that's truly different? And what do you think you attribute that growth and success to?
Yeah, I think from a kind of a higher level, it's mainly been the mindset that we have. We kind of have a mantra in our practice that mindset matters, and a saying that I can't take credit for, but nothing limits achievement like small thinking, and nothing expands possibilities like unleashed thinking. And Brian and I have always had a similar mindset on that. So when we kind of went down this path of actually scaling up our practice, it was some years before that where we had just some normal year-to-year organic growth. We had that in mind, and we kind of adopted more of like an acquisition entrepreneurship mindset where we acquired two practices within 14 months. So we went from one practice in 2021 to three practices 14 months later. We went from just the two of us to 7 total doctors in that time. And we do some, a lot of specialty stuff, and we can talk a little bit about that later on. But it's really been getting our processes down, and we're big E-Myth readers in the beginning, thanks to, back then, Gary Gerber and the Power Practice. We read that book before we started. And we really took the franchise prototype to heart, which is interesting when you have one practice, right? It's hard to know how important that is. But now that we're at 3, it's when you come up with a process, you make sure it's something that's scalable and you can do across 3 locations with 7 doctors and 30 staff, and it can't just be haphazardly put together. And I think it's been a combination of all of that stuff and some really hard work and grinding that's got us to where we are now.
Yeah. Give me an example when you're talking about
processes and scaling up, what are the things that you're doing in your practice that may be a little bit counterintuitive, or maybe you don't know that if most practices are doing them? What are the kinds of things that you mean here?
I think one thing that we focused in on is we're a customer service company that happens to do eye care, and we try to instill that in staff, but also when we're implementing any new treatments or any new technologies or anything that can improve communication, it's always thinking about how the patient is going to experience this, how we can best their experience. And we're in a highly competitive area. It's all about standing out and being more unique. And then building out from the idea and creating processes that can be cookie cutter in each location.
So what's an example? And Brian or Tyler, you guys tell me, what are some things that you do that a patient wouldn't experience when they walk in somewhere else?
Yeah, so I guess one thing we get a lot of comments on, we just very simple, and it's not a big cost, but we implemented a drink menu for people where we have sparkling water and La Colombe coffees and different things they can order when they come in, and the staff actually smiles when they greet them. And we have a workup process that's pretty standardized across the locations that's able to identify things that a patient might not proactively tell you about, but that they're experiencing. So different questionnaires that they fill out that then prompt our staff to run certain testing. And then that seamlessly kind of transitions into the exam room with the doctor, and they are prompted to talk to the patient about these different things. And the uniqueness of, I guess, the customization to each patient is something we've really had a passion about. And we have patients all the time that travel from hours away to see us for different conditions, dry eye, keratoconus, those kind of things that just have been to multiple practices and, haven't gotten an answer that's been helpful or haven't even been heard. And I think sometimes it's just listening to the patient's complaint, and like focusing on that and not just, trying to push them into a specialty that you're doing. And then on checkout, we have processes in place where we follow up with the patient and make sure they're doing well with their glasses. And we have a guarantee for patients where if they're not happy with any purchase in our office, it's their money back. We call it our happiness guarantee. So there's things, I think it's interesting that we've come up with ideas in the past and we've run it by colleagues, and they kind of have gone to like, you guys are crazy. Like you can't afford to do that, or you can't give people their money back if they come back 90 days later. And it's like, if you just create this world where patients can feel comfortable and trust you, it just does wonders as far as growth is concerned. And you don't even think about the cost at that point because you're growing 500%, right? It's the small-minded thinking of, I can't afford to give out these $4 La Colombe coffees to patients that come in because it's too much of a cost, right? But the experience is really what matters and what sets you apart. And we've been able to do that now at scale, which is pretty interesting, which we were unsure whether that was going to be possible, but it's been fun.
Well, it's such an interesting insight, because you're absolutely right. I think when you're running a small boutique office where, you've got one OD who's kind of aware of everything else that's going on in the front, and, you really have true operational visibility and operational control. And I love what you said, and you guys said it to me the first time I met you, which is that you guys are a customer service company that just happens to do eye care, which is an incredible, I think it's a very different mindset than most people have, but it's an incredible insight into the overall mindset that you both have. What's interesting to me, and as you're describing this mindset and kind of its implementation of it, and I love that, patient walks in and you're immediately offering them something that breeds reciprocity, right? And it's not a go over to the drink stand and pick a coffee, right? It sounds like you're actually taking their order. So you're already interrupting their expectation of what's going to happen at an eye care practice or at a medical practice, right? We all dread going to the doctor because I have to check in, I have to wait, I have to, be tested. And like all of these things, you're immediately interrupting the patient's flow and saying, nope, this is going to be different by simply taking their order for a drink menu. And I think that's freaking brilliant. And I think, again, it gives people a little bit of insight into your mindset that while it seems like such a simple, straightforward thing on the patient psychology standpoint, it seems relatively, I think, relatively unprecedented in the way that patients will approach your practice. Now, the question I would have, and this is where I think there's going to be a little bit of skepticism from the audience, is, okay, true, when you have operational control, you're that single OD in that boutique practice, you've got full visibility, you can fix any problem. You hear someone getting, frustrated at the front desk, you can sweep in and solve any problem. You've got 7 associates, you've got a large operation, or 7 ODs, and some of these folks, how do you get them to buy in when you're not there? What are the kinds of things that you've done, and what are the processes in your organization that make sure that a patient has that same experience, even if you're not there?
I think, and this took us a little while to figure this out, is creating an intentional culture in the office and setting expectations, as well as demonstrating and expecting a certain set of core values that we have for the company. We've also been able to curate some leadership roles, staff that are all-stars to help see the vision that we have and continue the communication to staff members when we're not present. And lately, we started this in June, but EOS has been a great implementation and an accountability and a cadence on helping make sure the message is clear and understandable, and that every single employee is on the same page and expectations for the office culture and what we expect for patients' experience in the office.
Yeah, and just to jump in from a process standpoint, our staff knows. I think the happiness guarantee is a really great thing that I would have thought staff would kind of like jump on and just run with, because it makes it really simple on their end. If someone's not happy, just refund them. But it's actually been more of a thing we've had to coach, and a struggle for some people. Like staff are like, well, why would we refund them when they didn't try them long enough, or they didn't do this and they didn't do that? And it's getting the mindset across to them that like, that's, we want the patient to be happy. So it's okay to do it. And it's funny, like that's one of the things we get some pushback about is, they're so loyal to us that they think that they're doing us a favor by not just refunding people when they want to be refunded. But we give them full reign to do that kind of stuff. We don't micromanage. And one of the interesting things I think with being a one location practice where you are in everything and being a larger multi-location practice is once you kind of get out of your own way and let your people do their own thing, it really takes off. And a lot of times we've found that our leadership team is better at stuff than we are. We thought we were great hires, and we thought we were great coaches, and I think our staff now, our managers have surpassed us in that, and they're better than we are at it. And we're completely removed from the hiring process. We haven't actually interviewed a person in over a year. It's all done by our staff now, which is awesome because we can now focus on bigger stuff.
Well, it's interesting because then they also have buy-in when they're doing the hiring, for example. But are you both finding the same issues that most other practices are with, finding quality candidates and, people not showing up for work, and especially in certain key positions in the practice that, like the tech positions and that kind of stuff? Like, how do you create process around? Because I think a lot of people would say, well, when you have a larger practice or multiple locations, you have more problems. And it sounds like you guys have figured out a way to have less problems. I want to buy your argument that it's just process, but I know it's a lot more. So talk to that.
Well, I think we've been very lucky that we've generated a reputation in the local region, and we actually have some applicants that have heard about the practice and our office culture and how we operate, and people are seeking us out before we're even looking for an employee, which is really beneficial. Um, we have a hiring process that involves online applications. We do personality questionnaires through a company called Wonderlic, which helps identify certain key aspects for each role that we're looking to hire. We do a various set of interviews before the position is offered, whether it's through phone, in person, and then we also do working interviews. I personally think the working interview is a really big, important tool. It allows the potential staff member to interact with patients and staff. It lets us get a little more time spent with the potential hire to learn a little bit more about them. They learn more about the office culture and our core values during that process as well.
Okay, so how do you do it? Okay, so I'm hiring a tech for a working interview. How many days? What am I paying them? And how does it work?
You want this, Ty?
You can take it.
Okay, so we'll automatically email them out the Wonderlic questionnaire, which assesses their personality and some of their strengths and weaknesses. It'll let us know, depending on any position that they're applying for, how well they'll perform in that role. So we can filter out potential staff members through that process, whether they're someone worth bringing in to hire, or maybe we pass. And then we sometimes do a phone interview. We'll always bring them in for a normal standard interview process, but any candidate that we feel really strongly about, we bring them in for a working interview, which they will shadow the staff member, the position that they're applying for. They'll have more hands-on experience. We'll have them do certain tasks, easy things that are expected of that role. And in terms of compensation, we don't really have a set standard for what we offer per position. It's based off of the patient's or the potential employee's personality and their expertise, what they've had in the past. And one thing,
but you pay them for the working interview, right, Brian?
No, we don't. They come in
Oh.
for an hour or two, no compensation.
We used to do that, and we were advised not to do that. I don't know. I don't remember the reason why, but we were told we shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
And a quick
now
note
that you said that, I can probably think of a couple, liability things. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah. From a Wonderlic standpoint, which is pretty interesting too, we've now been able to create a ideal profile. So the Wonderlic kind of gives different areas a score to different areas. And we had our entire staff take the Wonderlic test, our existing staff, and we were able to internally kind of rate staff members, previous staff members, current staff members, tier 1 through tier 4. And then we were able to use the averages from each one of these areas and kind of create an ideal profile. So we have one now that if an employee matches, we have a pretty good success rate when they hit those things. And it's not 100%, obviously. There's always a real component to everything, but that's been another cool thing that we've been building out. It's going to take some years as we get more people in there, I think, to get more accurate. But it's pretty cool to have like an actual objective number to put on things.
And it's interesting. I think Power Practice has been working on that one for a while. So actually, for anybody listening, I'm probably going to get kicked in the shins for this later. But for anybody listening, if you want access to the Wonderlic tool that Power Practice uses, because Power Practice has set this up for a bunch of their clients, and so I think they have some global data points and some global job descriptions and things like that. If you want access to that at some ridiculously discounted rate, I'm sure that you can get it by emailing after this episode if you're listening now. So just ask a question about it, and we'll get back to you about it. And then moving back to this, because I know that you guys had also decided to use a technique that's used in a lot of other medical industry to help kind of structure your practice in a little bit of a different approach. Talk about that. Maybe Tyler, I'll go to you first to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we formed beginning of this year medical services organization, or an MSO. It's used a lot in a lot of specialties. Dental's a big one. They have DSOs. And really for us, it was last year with the third location coming on, accounting started to become a nightmare with, things were getting paid through our primary location that were for the third location. And there was a lot of shared expenses that we didn't really know how to break out. So we decided, after talking to a friend in North Carolina who had done something similar, to form this management company. And any shared expense kind of gets run through that management company. All the staff is a staff member of the management company. So if they bounce around to different locations, they're all paid through the management company. We can split that out on the back end. And it's really just streamlined the accounting and given us a clearer picture of what's actually going on at each location. It's also allowed us in a lot of ways to have more scale. So when we had 3 different contact lens accounts that we then rolled into one big contact lens account, as much as the reps say that they on their end see it as 3 different accounts being into one, like that wasn't happening. And now that it's one big account, we've gotten a lot more favorable rebates and pricing, and it's been great from that standpoint. And it's allowed us to kind of build out more of the structure of what we're going to need to keep this thing going forward. So all the management team, we just hired a fractional CFO and our revenue cycle manager, and all those kind of higher level positions that would sit at the MSO level can now do that. And it was probably a little bit premature for where we're at now, but we saw where we were going. And with another acquisition, another practice, we're going to need for sure to have a structure like that in place.
And so just to be clear, the way the MSO works is that there's a central organization and you have all of your, we'll call them, central expenses, right? Accounting and payroll and, managers and staff and all that stuff working for that organization. And then each of the locations just basically pays its fair share to that MSO based off of a variety of factors.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a management fee, like an MSO fee that gets paid up to the MSO that covers the stuff that you were talking about, even like our medical records and our EHR and stuff like that. Those kind of expenses are all included in a fee that goes up monthly to the management company.
Well, and I think the benefit, clearly there's, some scalability in the sense that, you have one payroll, one, and again, your reps are treating you as one entity. So potentially for cost savings, totally get that. You mentioned something about, so it's easier to tell what each location is doing. Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's so, and there may be multi-location practices that operate them all separate and can do that properly. But we were having a lot of shared expenses fall on our primary location, our mothership location, and it was making that location look not as profitable as the other ones. Because it was hard to just keep track of what was shared and what wasn't to break out. So once we were able to kind of move all of that shared expense to one centralized location and then monthly go in and literally break out what each practice is due, it just gave us the clear picture of profitability across the 3 locations.
Yeah, so that sounds like one tool that you're using for scaling up. It also, you mentioned a little bit about acquisitions. Talk about this. And, obviously acquisitions are a scary thing for a lot of people in the industry, right? Their private equity is always, it always sounds like there's blood in the water and they're constantly circling. And, if a private equity acquires my competitor, then, what's going to happen next and that kind of thing. But then also
it feels like pretty much everybody in the industry has someone knocking on their door and asking if they're interested in selling. So what made you guys decide that you were going to go into the quote acquisition game? And then how'd you do it? And is it hard for a one door practice to start thinking about acquisitions?
I think we always had the vision of growing. And when we started our first practice cold, we started part time. And as we grew the business, we put more and more of our doctoring hours into the practice. And we got to the point where we had um, a, a really great candidate that was looking to be hired as an associate OD. We were able to pull her in, which Tyler at the time was still part time. And we really wanted to get him into the practice more, seeing patients, having more influence on the business. And the way we saw that was by acquiring. Um, so we were able, just through local networking, being aware of docs that are looking to sell, reps we talk to all the time about how our vision is and what we're looking to do and how we want to grow. So really applying networking skills for either local meetings, local docs, and utilizing the reps really helped us identify potential acquisitions, which we've been able to get two so far, and hopefully a fourth soon to come.
Well, and maybe go back to the history just a little bit, Tyler, if you want to jump in on this. Is the talk a little bit about how you guys started cold and worked part time, and even kind of how you guys came together as business partners in the first place.
Sure. We actually interviewed on the same day for optometry school at what was then Pennsylvania College of Optometry, now Salus University. I had the flu. Brian had a broken ankle. We were in pretty bad shape, but they let us both in. And then we ended up living together in school and just stayed friends. We're both from the South Jersey area. So when we got done, Brian moved locally close to where our first practice ended up being. We had stayed in touch and always had a heart for kind of having our own practice. So we opened 2014 cold, our first location, and I think grew what we thought was pretty fast. Looking back, it was not as fast as what we've done now, but it was. I think we learned a lot. We learned what we didn't know. We always had I think one of our other benefits is we have a really good team around us, and we don't think we're the smartest person in the room. And I think if you are the smartest person in the room, you got to find a new room to be in. And we've kind of continued to find new rooms as we've grown. But then, the pandemic happened and we ended up with this, like most practices do, this big backlog of patients. And we saw that as an opportunity more so than like, is this going to die out in the next few months? And we, as Brian mentioned, brought in our first associate at that point. And that was really pivotal because I think we saw a one location practice go to two locations in a year and almost double. And then we were like, hey, could we do this elsewhere? And we had been looking for, Brian kind of underplayed it, but we had years for a practice and we had sent out letters, cold letters to doctors, seeing if they wanted to sell. And it really, nothing happened for 5+ years until it did. And then, we're probably some of the youngest practice owners in the area. So as doctors started getting older, we had doctors start to reach out to us, and the practice that we had our first acquisition of, she's wonderful. It was a great practice. She has still to this day, I don't know a doctor that has more patient loyalty than her, but she was booked out for weeks. And we went in there and immediately kind of added 2 exam rooms, opened up time. And that practice, the year after we took over, doubled in size. And that's an interesting thing, with taking over a doctor's practice. It's done it for 30 years. It's almost like moving into someone's house, and they instead of selling it and leaving, they kind of stay on, and you start moving their furniture around and telling them they have to wash the dishes a different way. And initially there's even with her, there was some friction. But she's wonderful. We have it's like a dream scenario, and which is what we really want, right? It's cool to be able to scale and grow, but it's also cool to be able to have this platform that these doctors that want to sell their practice can stay on and do so happily, and not have to work for a corporation that's going to make them see more patients an hour and, do all that stuff. So I think that's where we've really excelled and been able to acquire in a private equity world, and hopefully are able to still continue to do that.
Yeah. And, I think the interesting thing as you're talking about moving into somebody's house and telling them to wash the dishes a different way, I'm actually really curious about how you get your associate ODs to a higher level of compliance, or do you just basically say, you know what, it's okay if the numbers are a little bit differently? Because I know you guys watch numbers pretty closely, and I imagine, I'm going to guess a few numbers that you guys pay attention to. Certainly, revenue per patient and capture rate for various things, right? Probably your glasses, contact lens, and maybe even your specialty services capture rate. Those tend, in many practices with multiple ODs, those tend to wildly swing back and forth between ODs. What's the case in your practice, and how do you manage it?
I think it's talking about numbers. We've heard it many times. What gets measured gets improved. But just measuring the numbers isn't going to do it. It's having the communication on, hey, these are the numbers, but what's going on? What are your thoughts behind this? And then talking about how either of us would handle not the situation, but how to coach the staff member or the associate doc to better improve on certain metrics. I think the communication factor is a big role, and neither of us, there are certain categories, KPIs that Tyler and myself aren't really great at. So I think us being humble enough and approaching the associate docs that are crushing a certain metric to learn what's their wording, what's their communication style, how are they finding success in this area, how can we spread that word to the rest of the associate docs, including us, on improving certain things. And to hone back on EOS is it creates that cadence and that communication, focusing in on metrics and issues that may arise with any of those.
So just to be clear, are you guys looking at a scorecard for everybody, and how often? And when you're talking about it, how often are you talking about it?
We meet collectively as doctors bi-monthly. Every 2 weeks we meet up.
Bi-weekly.
Sorry?
Bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly.
Yeah.
We meet bi-weekly. And individually, I fill the role of the integrator and the DOD, we call the director of docs. So I'm meeting up with the doctors one-on-one monthly, having communications about their individual metrics.
So, and at that point, if you see somebody is like really killing it, like let's say somebody has got dry eye capture rate like nobody's business, what do you do?
We praise them, shine that metric, and then we ask for them to communicate to the rest of the docs during our doctorly bi-monthly meetings, to help us educate on how they're finding success in that category.
Okay. And if somebody really sucks, somebody's contact lens capture rate, dropped by 15%, and it continues to do so, what do you do?
Well, per office, the metrics are pretty obvious, and everybody can see the numbers per office. Some docs are exclusive in one office than another, so it's pretty clear that someone may be either falling behind or doing really well. We try not to put people on blast if they're not doing great in a category, but that's more of a communication is, hey, the rest of the crew is seeing these achievements in these categories. Where do you feel like you may be falling behind? And then having some talking points and discussion points on where maybe they could find some success in that area.
Yeah. And, I think where that applies the most is the specialty service stuff. So I know that you guys have been honing your craft with dry eye, for example, for the last few years. And I think you're on a really good run right now where it's a significant part of your business. So talk a little bit about how you developed it, but then really, I'm curious how you got buy-in from everybody else in the organization so that the two of you aren't the only ones who are pushing it.
Yeah, it's dry is one of those things that I feel like a lot of doctors are now interested in. So from a clinical standpoint, we haven't had one or two, but most doctors want to learn dry when they come in and they see our dry specialty that we do have. And I think the biggest thing with our dry eye program that we've been able to do is shifting them again a mindset of, dry is one of these things where it's a disease that we know is progressive, but we still, as a group of doctors nationally, there's docs that look at dry eye, they see it. If the patient's not complaining, they kind of say, all right, we'll see you again in a year. And they wait until the patient's symptomatic. So we've kind of shifted that, and we've had to teach that to our doctors. And I think that was a little tough initially, but they're all kind of on the same page. And when you're able to show them mybography images of glands dying off and getting worse, and I always use the analogy, like if you saw someone with high blood pressure and they weren't in pain because of it, would you just say, oh, you're good, we'll see you next year? No, right? Like people treat that. So we've created that mindset, and then also a screening that's standardized across the locations to identify these patients, and then to educate the patient that it's this condition. And we're a really big on the in-office treatments, because when we started, we were doing a lot of the drops and the wipes and all that stuff, and the compliance is terrible, if we're all being honest. Like when patients are on that, they're dropping out. Versus an IPL or a radio frequency where I can, do 4 treatments and then do it once a year going forward, and they're pretty well controlled and they're happy and their lives are busy and they don't have to think about going to the pharmacy. And we've really built that up, and we probably do about 60 to 70 IPLs a month across the locations. And the docs have all really been in on that. I mean, there's definitely coaching, and Brian has done an awesome job with that, with the doctors. I think just that routine cadence of meeting with them, and they know that we're looking at the numbers and they know why, right? It's not a, hey, we want to make more money in our practice. It's a, hey, these are patients that fast forward 20 years down the line may be sitting in your chair miserable. And we talk about patients that we've had that get to us at that point, and it's terrible. I mean, it's hard to get those people back to where they're happy.
So what's the format of these conversations, Tyler? Are you doing like lecture style at your doctors, or are you doing case review, or what's the, and I'm envisioning that doctor who's practiced in her practice for 30 years, and you came in, and not only are you like telling her how to wash her dishes, but you just like, took over her master bedroom and you decided that you're going to put in a gym in there and you're teaching her to work out. So like, what are you seeing in terms of what's the most effective way? I mean, the language that you're using makes perfect sense, but what's the most effective way, and when is the right time to have these types of conversations to get associate buy-in?
I think it's using evidence-based medicine and case histories, I think, is a really good one. We've thrown around the idea of actually like calling a couple of patients of ours and having them do a presentation on, what they felt and how they got to us and what changed after they were treated. We have a few that I know Brian and I always talk about, that they were grandmothers who came who couldn't keep their eyes open enough on a beach to play with their grandkids, and we fit them in scleral lenses, and they were literally able to play with their grandkids again. And like, it's hard not to buy into that when you tell people. And the doc that you're talking about specifically, she's been doing this 30 plus years, but she is forward thinking, and she's open to learning new stuff and wanting to learn new stuff. So we might have just gotten lucky with the people that we have. We have just a really good team. But it hasn't been too much of a struggle on that end to get them to buy in and be all in on it.
Yeah, I think making the technology accessible right at the time of acquisition was really beneficial, because the technology, the diagnostic and therapeutic on both sides, are really exciting. And it gets associate docs as well as previous owners, I think, really intrigued and interested in kind of expanding their scope of practice and their mindset on certain conditions.
Well, I love that, meaning you're introducing new tech into their practice. Just, so people can understand a little bit more detail, talk a little bit about if there's any numbers that you're especially proud of. What percentage of patients are you seeing right now that are dry eye candidates, and what percentage of those patients actually turn into dry eye treatments for you guys?
So we have about 10%, I would say, maybe a little bit more of our annual exams end up getting a dry eye evaluation. And then depending on the location, we're anywhere from 40 to 60% of those evaluations get some dry eye treatment in office. So we LipiFlow, OptiLight, or radiofrequency. And that's something that has consistently improved.
Yeah, you guys are continuing to grow that pretty aggressively.
Yeah. And I think when you take over an office, the initial year is kind of a wash, right? You're kind of trying to implement things, get things going. So we've seen as that first year kind of goes by and we get into the second year of the new practice, things really start to trend up and pick up to where our primary location is.
Yeah. So you guys have gotten a lot of experience over the course of the last few years. And I think that, if you're going back to 2014, you said, when you first opened your first office, what are, let's just call them, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 things that you really wish you knew back then that you know now that would have been massive shortcuts for you?
I think our first learning experience was not having a couple beers at a trade show and then trying to buy equipment. That was a mistake we did once or twice, and that was an early rule we made for ourselves.
That's good. That's good. All right, Tyler, you hit me with one, and then back to you, Brian.
I think we thought when we opened we were going to create a good culture because we were two cool guys that really cared about our staff, and that was going to be it. And we have a nice office to work at, and that's so off. And building a really great culture takes a lot of work and a lot of consistency in doing that. And more kudos to Brian. This year we've kind of made that into a process, and the whole culture building is now all process really. We have cadences where we celebrate birthdays and work birthdays and buy lunches. And this quarter, we're going to be naming our MVP, Premier Eye Associates, of the quarter, where we're going to honor one of our staff members. And it's just like constant building this culture and, hiring slow and firing fast, and make sure you don't have these one employee that turns wrong can be a cancer to everyone. And that's something we let go way too long over the years. And we've gotten to the point where we don't tolerate that anymore. So that would be a big one I'd love to tell myself 10 years ago.
Yeah. Get rid of the people who are not moving you forward, and don't be afraid to fire them. I've heard that from lots of people, and it's advice that I think we all still have to keep giving ourselves every once in a while, because you're like, but that person's doing work that seems valuable, but
For sure.
They're not so good for them. Yeah. Got it. All right, Brian, back to you. One more.
Well, I think we've actually been very beneficial and lucky that very early on, before we even had a location, a physical property for the business, we started with a consulting group. We're particular to power practice, but I think that's really helped us avoid many pitfalls we would have otherwise fallen into. They're a group that helps kind of steer you in the direction and keep the vision alive. And we've also utilized them as almost like a third party decision maker. If I feel one way, Tyler feels another way about a certain process or way to move the business forward, we use them as the end all. What they say is golden. And I've recommended to many of my colleagues interested in starting a practice, and whether or not it's power practice, I think some form of a coach consultant is invaluable.
Getting validation or an extra set of eyes on key decisions is something I hear a lot from people as well. Tyler, you got another one?
Let's see. I think it's hard. I think every mistake that we made, we've learned from. And I know I'm really digging into this mindset thing, but every time I talk to an OD that's kind of stuck and not happy, it's just that they look at things in the wrong way. and we really, I would say building a team was one of the most important things, an external team for us, like Brian said. So not only consultants, but a legal team and accountants and financial advisors and other people that you can kind of in maybe outside the industry. Because I think sometimes as an industry, we get so stuck in like how everyone else is doing it. And maybe that's something I would say. If everyone's going one direction, I think it's really important to look to see if the other direction is a place you need to go. And we've continued to do that. And I think, every time something swings too far one direction, I think there's probably opportunity the other way. And it's scary when you're new. And I think one thing, like we didn't start with many vision insurances thanks to the power practice, but that's like one of those things. I think everyone goes a certain way with that, and you feel like you can't go the other way, and the other way might be the best way to go. So just paving your own path and doing that, even when the risks are high because your practice is smaller, would be something I would say is a good move.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me because everything you guys are saying, it sounds to me like there's this shared mindset of really turning mistakes into opportunities and learnings and growing from that. But I imagine that that's a shared mindset that the two of you have to have as business partners. And there is something that happened during optometry school where you guys decided we're going to start this part-time business together, which is, for me, I guess I want to hear a little bit because I think that there's lots of people who have business partners, and whether it's, hey, I'm taking over a practice from a retiring, from somebody who's further on in their career, or I've decided to start partnering with someone, whether it's for financial reasons or for like-minded reasons. Maybe talk a little bit, you guys, about the experience of choosing to become business partners and some of the challenges that you guys have had along the way and how you've resolved them.
Well, I remember back in optometry school, probably our second or third year in, we were talking about starting a practice together. So it's been a long time coming. Plans to do exactly what we're doing and creating our own pathway. I think in the earlier years, that's when we had the most trouble communicating with each other, and it was extremely challenging. I think just because we never saw each other, even though we worked a lot on the business and worked to grow. The communication was difficult because we were both working part-time elsewhere. When Tyler was in the office, I was somewhere else moonlighting. And we found that not only communication, but projects were getting crisscrossed. There were multiple times where we were both working on certain things in the business, and we were doing the same exact thing, whereas we could have been dividing and conquering. And I think one thing, sometimes personal stuff comes into play and can affect your focus or affect your communication style. That I think over the years we've learned how each responds to different communication styles or wording. And I think we're in a really good groove. It's been many years that we're really, I think, honed in on the vision and the way the practice is moving and where we're going to take this.
That's interesting, and I think that as you're talking about some of these communication challenges, what had to happen in order for, if anybody listening in the audience is in that same position, what had to happen in order for you guys to resolve these? Tyler?
I think part of it was just experience with each other and learning how the other one communicates. I'm much more of like wear my emotions on my sleeve, want to hash it out, get it talked about and move on. And Brian's kind of the opposite. I think also clearly defined roles has been huge for us this year. So, we read the EOS book, and there's a little quiz you can take on if you're a visionary or integrator mind. And we both read it and we were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like I'm very much on the visionary side of things. Brian's on the integrator side. And it's things that I used to feel bad about. Like I'm not good at following up with things, or so Brian will get like a 10-15 text thread from me on like a Saturday after I'm at the gym with ideas that I had, and he sometimes takes a few days to get back to me, and I'm like, what's he think about this, so I think that's been interesting, but we really, part of it's luck. I think we just happen to have complementary skill sets, and when we realize that, it's really been like the fuel to the fire. Before we realized that, I think when Brian was mentioning we early on had a lot more disagreements, was we didn't really know where our place was here, and now we do, and we can kind of run with that, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen a lot of partnerships work well, and then also a lot of partnerships not work well over the years. And I think what I've pulled away from it is that sometimes you just need to make sure that the people, number one, agree on the vision, and number two, agree on the core values, like the core mindsets that you have together.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, it's about defining your lanes. So somebody is in one lane and somebody's in another lane, and those lanes may have a little bit of crossover, but how you resolve that crossover sounds like for you guys, you have a third party that you can consult, but most of the time the lanes don't cross over and somebody gets final say. Certainly you can take advantage of another person's perspective in that lane, but somebody gets final say in that particular lane, regardless of, whether the other person agrees with them or not. And so defining those lanes up front is, or at some point throughout the partnership, I think has been helpful to a lot of people who I've talked to. So it sounds like you guys have had a similar experience.
For sure.
Yeah.
There's lots of things we could talk about with your practice, but as we wrap up the conversation for today, is there anything that any one piece of advice, and I'm going to say this, you've given some advice to folks who are just starting out a practice, but is there one piece of advice you would give to a practice that's, maybe like at the midpoint of their growth journey? They're doing well. Maybe they have one person with one, maybe they've got an associate OD, they've got a little bit of a team at the front, but they're hitting some of the typical, we'll call them struggles that most practices have. Is there any one piece of advice that each of you can share with those practices specifically as they proceed on their growth journey?
I can start. Yeah. You're like, that's a Tyler question right there. I think if it comes down to individual need or wants, right? If they're content, then that's totally fine. And I think being content is a beautiful thing in life. I think in business, it depends like what you want. We don't ever really want to be content on the business side, but you always want to try to be content in what you have in life. But growing and getting bigger is not exponentially more difficult. And in a lot of ways, it gets easier. We don't have to worry about the little things anymore. And I know it's been mentioned on this show before by previous guests, but there's a book, 10X is easier than 2X.
Yep.
And that's true. I mean, It's once you get bigger and you have a leadership team built out that can do a lot of the stuff that you had to do when it was a one location practice, you can take time out of your practice. I take February off with my family every year and go to Florida now. Brian's going to Peru for 2.5 weeks soon. You don't have to shut your practice down when you leave. And if you're really wanting that, there's so many resources to get you there. You have to put your head down, and it is painful in the scale up time. Cash flow was never really an issue for us until we went from 1 to 3 in a 2-year period. But it's just, once you get there and you look back, it's kind of amazing as to what you can accomplish. So I think if anyone's wanting to do it, there's so much opportunity out there to just do it and put your head down for a couple of years, and then you'll be much better off when you're done.
Love that.
I have 2 thoughts on that now. One is, I think a lot of docs have a hard time letting go of responsibilities and delegating. And that was one thing that we experienced early on is you can't do it all. You need to be able to trust your team and delegate. The other thing I think we've learned is not getting stuck in the small weeds of things. Like dealing with $1 off a supply of contact lenses. We prefer to think more big picture and focus in on things that can move the needle in a big way rather than something small. So I think shifting your mindset in that fashion can be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's super helpful, guys. And I think that you guys have had this incredible journey, and you've shared some of the elements of that success on the journey. And catching you at this exact moment in time is going to be so interesting if we do this episode in another couple of years and see what you've learned since then, what you wish you would have told yourself at this point. Love that. So thank you so much for all of the wisdom and all of the insights that you've shared with our audience today. Incredible to have you both on the Power Hour. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Eugene.
Thanks, Eugene.
Hey there, it's Eugene, and I've got a question for you. Do you do medical billing in your practice? What if we took 10 charts and looked at them pretty closely? Would they be good enough to pass an audit? Or would you owe the insurance company some money? Or would there be some found revenue that you could put back in your pocket? So looking at 10 charts is a new service that's now available from the Power Practice, and it's called the Power Audit. What happens during the Power Audit is that some of the most knowledgeable billing experts in the country are going to do a friendly audit on your charts and see if they can find opportunities. By the way, in auditing hundreds of charts, 9 out of 10 charts they look at, they find something. And typically that something fits into 2 categories. 1, something that better protects your practice, or 2, something that can make you more money. In fact, almost every single audit they do uncovers underbilling areas where you can get paid more for what you already did. So let's just play it out. You send them your medical charts, and a few weeks later, they provide you with a detailed report, an analysis, a write-up, a coaching guide that helps you prevent any issues in the future. And again, helps you get paid more for what you're already doing while protecting your practice. So if you're doing any amount of medical billing in your practice, this is a service that's well worth the $2,500 it costs. And as a limited time opportunity, 10 listeners from this episode can get a $700 savings certificate for the Power Audit. So the price is only $17.99, but the opportunities that the Power Audit uncovers are worth many, many, many multiples of that. So go to the Power Practice website. Up near the top, you can click Request a Power Audit. Now, you're not committing to pay anyone at that point. You're just locking in your $700 savings. But you will get a chance to schedule a 10-minute phone call to get your questions answered and to see if the Power Audit is a fit for your practice. Again, that's the Power Audit on thepowerpractice.com.